Hi, I'm Susan Cauley, and welcome to You're Not Alone Surviving Your Child's Disability. Having a visual mobility or physical impairment should not stop any individual with a disability from playing sports. This awareness gives athletes the chance to compete with non-disabled athletes, thus bringing down barriers, broadening their abilities and experiences. Here to discuss adaptive sports is Joe Walsh, President and founder of Adaptive Sports New England. Hi Joe, welcome to the show.
Hi Susan, thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Now, first of all, can you explain what adaptive sports is and what it means to people with disabilities?
Well, adaptive sports is what it sounds like. It's sports that have been adaptive, and there really is the widest range of possibilities there to ensure that the sport gets modified in a manner that accommodates someone who may not have typical skills or typical capabilities. Sometimes adaptive sports are something specific, like wheelchair basketball, which is a game that has specific activities and has rules built for it. Other times when people talk about adaptive sports, they look at, say, cycling, where there are many different ways to accommodate cycling. So the term adaptive sports fits a lot of different parameters.
Does it more or less mean that they need some type of equipment in order to play the sport?
Great question. Not always. Some of it is equipment intensive, but others of it is just methods or techniques used, adaptive techniques. For instance, running with an athlete or a young person who's blind doesn't require anything other than a shoelace, which I mean, it is equipment, but I think most people have got control over that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Now, what does Adaptive Sports New England actively participate in sports?
The sports that we conduct programs in are primarily school type sports, so sports that kids would experience at the high school. In particular, we've worked so far in track and field and swimming. We plan on moving to some additional sports, including wheelchair basketball, or actually we've done some wheelchair basketball work. But there's a lot of opportunities around New England, around greater Boston even. Community rowing does rowing programs, and there's sailing programs, sled hockey that's run by Spalding Adaptive Sports Centers. I mean, there's a lot of different activities that are available beyond just the programs that we run particularly.
Okay, well, in reference to high school and college, what type of training do you offer coaches and athlete directors and community individuals to encourage inclusion in these sports, or actually to start an adaptive sport team?
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of different levels of the way that the training that or one would look for in terms of having an inclusive sport program. The most important is the attitudinal training.
Yes.
It's the yes. It's that the answer is yes as opposed to no when the question gets asked. And we don't necessarily specialize in that type of training. There are some really good groups that might do that in terms of inclusiveness more generally for students who have disabilities. What we find ourselves doing is doing more of the technical training of how do we accommodate an athlete who is blind, who wants to be on the swim team or whatever. And so that type of training is really more of a technical assistance in most cases, where we go up once a school identifies an athlete, a student in their school who wants to be an athlete, wants to compete on some of their sports teams. They'll give us a call and say, hey, we've got a 10th grader who whatever has cerebral palsy and wants to participate on our track program, and we want to see if we can include her in that program. And so we'll go out and work with the coaches and the athletic director and maybe some of the other school personnel, depending on the nature of the impairment that the student has, and we'll figure out some solutions.
Yeah. How do you assist the inclusion of athletes, you just kind of stepped on that, who have visual mobility and other physical impairments in schools, in college? What about college sports?
Some of the same things. So what we step in with the schools, and we'll go and make a site visit to schools, or create a repeat visit to some of their practices to help their coaches, or maybe it's just once a week that we go to support them. But we also run our Paralympic Sport Club program.
Right.
We run a Paralympic Sport Club Boston program. Paralympic Sport Club is a program run by the U.S. Olympic Committee. We've got a designation as Paralympic Sport Club Boston, but there are other Paralympic Sport Clubs around New England and around the country.
Can you explain what Paralympics is versus Special Olympics?
Oh, great, good call. A good place for us to start. The Paralympics is the Paralympic Games is the elite international competition for athletes with disabilities, specifically physical disabilities and visual disabilities, visual impairments and physical impairments. When I refer to Paralympic sport, or this reference to Paralympic Sport Club, it's really sport as it's practiced at the Paralympic Games. So it doesn't necessarily connote a high level of competition.
I see.
When I refer to Paralympic sport, or actually the language is now evolving so that really is referred to more as parasport. So parasport is sport as it's practiced at the Paralympic Games, but from a very novice level all the way up through elite level.
Right.
And that differs, of course, from Special Olympics, where Special Olympics' mission is to enhance the lives of persons with intellectual disabilities through sport. So their focus, certainly there are athletes in the Special Olympics programs who have physical impairments, but generally those are coupled with their intellectual impairment.
Yeah.
And so Paralympics, for the most part, are parasport supports youth and young adults who have physical or mobility or visual impairments, but have typical cognitive development and typical emotional development, behavioral development.
Do you ever feel like you might have a team with intellectual disabilities?
We wouldn't specifically for Paralympic Sport Boston or Adaptive Sports New England, because we don't have the need to do that. Special Olympics does a fantastic job of that, and they've got programs throughout the community, throughout the state, and so it's a need. When we started Paralympic Sport Club Boston or the Adaptive Sports New England 3 years ago, we made a mission to increase participation by youth and young adults who either have a visual or mobility impairment. Because the numbers of participation is really low with that group, even lower than those with intellectual disabilities. And a lot of that is because of the lack of opportunities. So we're working to try and figure out how do we get that group more active and more included. We make a lot of referrals to Special Olympics programs and to Special Olympics Massachusetts in particular for athletes that would be more appropriately served by Special Olympics.
Does Special Olympics have that intensity or that specialized, like parasports has more professional athletes? Does Special Olympics have something like that, like a specialized group? I always thought that they had just included everybody.
Special Olympics does include everybody and across the breadth of their programs, and they do probably the best job of any program I've ever seen do that.
Right.
Paralympics has the full range. It has that elite level competition with the Paralympic Games, but Special Olympics also has their Special Olympics World Games. And the athletes who compete at the Special Olympics World Games, there is a group of them who are very, very competitive and sort of categorized that way into that group, because Special Olympics, they just meet everybody where they are. So the top competitors actually end up competing against one another. The top athletes end up competing against each other in their A seed group. And so, and I think the Paralympic sports or para sports, as I was explaining earlier, that really covers the whole range of competitiveness as well. And so the Paralympics go all the way up to those professional athletes who are competing at the Paralympic Games, or some of them are professionals, most of them are actually amateurs. But our focus with Adaptive Sports New England is really on much more of the novice and high school level sport, sport competition, college sport competition, not that elite group. We know how to hand somebody off to those national level coaches who are expert at that. But our focus is more at the, let's get more of these youth and young adults who have disabilities playing.
Now, what is the importance of children with disabilities participating in these adaptive sports?
Well, you know, at the baseline, it's the same benefits that kids who don't have disabilities get from playing sports. There's goal setting and perseverance and routine and a discipline of practice. It's teamwork, it's being on a team, learning how to play with others, learning how to work with others, learning how to take direction from a coach and accept that that's okay, and hopefully that translates over to taking direction from their parents a little bit every once in a while.
That would help.
It's oftentimes the coach is coaches have an awful lot of influence over children in terms of their life development, and if kids who have disabilities don't get the opportunity to play sports, then they don't have the interaction to interact with those coaches. Now, there's even additional benefits to kids who have disabilities in that oftentimes those kids are a little bit more isolated. And if you think about somebody who's blind, you know, unless somebody actively engages that child, oftentimes that child gets left out. But if the child is part of the team, well, then if the track team eats lunch at the third table down on the left, then the child with a disability always knows that, hey, if I go down there to the third table on the left, I know that the track team's going to, my track team is going to come down and sit there, and so my friends will be there. And so it provides an opportunity to break down some of those barriers and social, just rifts, not rifts, not bad things, just things that it creates additional opportunity for that kind of interaction to happen.
How does a child or a parent access this para sports or adaptive sports? I mean, how do they get involved?
Well, there's a lot of different avenues to potentially get involved. Our website, which is adaptivesportsne.org, www.adaptivesportsne.org, NE as in New England.org, that we maintain a calendar of activities so that someone local, that's mostly Greater Boston focused, but someone can go onto that calendar of activities and look and see all the different sports that are going on, whether it's wheelchair tennis or wheelchair basketball, rowing, kayaking, track and field practice, swimming, sled hockey, kayaking, sailing. All of those sports are there's listings there on that calendar. And they're not programs that we're running, but some of them are programs we're running, but some of them are programs that other groups are running. But that's a little bit overwhelming maybe for the first time looker, unless you know that you want to be.
What sport do I want to put him in?
That's right. And so we have what we refer to as our sport concierge service.
Yes, what is that? I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so the sport concierge is based off of the concept of a hotel concierge. Right? So you're at a hotel and yes, these are fancy hotels. Fancy hotels have concierges, so we don't get to do that too often. But when we stay at fancy hotels, then you go and you find the concierge and you say, I need a place to, whatever, go have dinner with 6 friends and we want it to be an Italian place, we need a reservation. And the concierge gives you all the choices that you might choose from that because of her knowledge of the local environment, and then helps you make those connections and get that reservation.
That's great.
And those are the kinds of things that we try and do with our sport concierge service. We'll take a call from a parent or from an athletic director or a coach or a program director at a YMCA or Boys and Girls Club or a track club, or and they come up with the situation that they're facing. We try and give them some choices and give them some options and have a conversation, figure out what might be some good options to start, and give them some choices about how to get involved, and then help them out doing it.
That's a great service.
Yeah. Well, we think it's important because just as in school, there's many of these students are being served by individualized education programs, right? Or individualized education plans. And
yes.
So the sport involvement kind of needs to be individualized as well. And that doesn't mean be by yourself. It just means customized for the needs of this specific
It would be interesting to see them putting it in an IEP, you know, some kind of sports, you know, programming, you know, for every individual. I mean, not that some have that capability, but they all should probably try something.
Well, I think everybody's got some capability.
Yeah.
Right? So not everybody's going to make the varsity baseball team.
Right.
I wouldn't have been a very good baseball player. In fact, I proved that I was not a very good baseball player as a kid who was legally blind. I tried. Believe me, I tried. But I was never going to be a varsity baseball player.
Right.
But I certainly have the capacity to, even as a kid, had the capacity to run track and do swimming, and did some of those sports as well. And those are, though that's not the solution for every kid who has a disability. There are a wide range of possibilities, and that's why we like to work with the sport concierge to figure out what some of those options are. But with regard to the IEP, I don't think that there's anything blocking that from being something that was included in IEPs for both for physical education and for after-school activities.
Yeah.
You know, a couple of years ago, in 2013, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, the OCR, as they're known, they issued a very nice Dear Colleague letter, and people who are familiar with this world know what Dear Colleagues letters are. They're pretty strict guidance coming from the Department of Education. And that was in reference to Section 504, and basically it said that after-school programs, after-school sports programs in particular, are part of the school experience and need to be students who have disabilities need to be included in those programs, or served by those programs, just as students with disabilities need to be served by all other elements of the school school program. And so I think that there's a window open there for parents and advocates and principals and teachers and others to see, how does this work, and can we ask? And I think that the starting point for that is to ask.
Right.
Right?
Bring it up. You can't do anything unless you ask.
Well, no one's going to bring it up because they're not looking for extra trouble. I mean, our educators...
Or money.
Our educators have got lots to do, and they're working really, really hard to support kids who have disabilities in the schools. So they're not looking for extra work.
No.
But this is something that if the parents believe that it's important, and I think that every parent should, I think it's important, most parents believe that it's important for their kids to participate in sports, and kids who have disabilities it's no less important for them. In fact, it may even be more important. So you gotta ask and see if you can start the conversation, because there are solutions for just about everybody. Like I said, you may not make the varsity baseball team, but there's probably a solution in there somewhere.
I'm sure there are. Yeah. Now, you were a Olympian, weren't you?
I was a Paralympian in 1988 and 92, and maybe we need to edit that out, because but that was a long time ago. But I learned how to cross-country ski in college, and got pretty good at it, and had the opportunity to represent the U.S. At the Paralympic Games, the Winter Paralympic Games in 88 and 92. Yeah, it was a pretty special experience. I feel real fortunate to have had that opportunity to do that. So.
Wow. Now, other than having a visual mobility or physical impairment, Are there certain requirements that athletes must meet to become involved in Paralympic sports?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think it probably the same constraints the same limitations or requirements for other sports, right? So in school sports, you need to maintain your grade point average, and you need to have the clearance from the team doctor or the school doctor. You have a medical checkup, and you need to follow the rules of the team. And so requirements like that, I think, are pertinent.
Nothing special that they need to...
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, the certain sports are practiced by athletes who have certain types of disabilities. So at the Paralympic level, judo is a sport that's only played by athletes who are blind. So all the judoka at the Paralympic Games are blind. That doesn't mean that somebody who has an amputation can't do judo at a local dojo, a local club here and around Boston. And we'd certainly try and help someone find a good match on something like that. I mean, Olympian Jimmy Pedro over in Wakefield has got his dojo there, and he's always open to have the Paralympians. He has the Paralympic national team, Paralympic team from last year that went down to Rio, came and trained with Jimmy up in Wakefield for a couple of weeks. Yeah,
wow, that's
because they know that he's a really a top-notch coach. So yeah, right next door here. So
just about.
Yeah.
Now, what type of work do you do with the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, if I can say that?
The Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association.
Yeah,
that's right.
There you go.
That's the high school. For anybody who doesn't know, that's the high school sports governing entity. Right. So the MIAA is in charge of all sports that get played amongst high school sports in high schools in Massachusetts. And every state has a high school athletic association like that. So the MIAA has been very innovative and really aggressive in opening the door for student athletes who have disabilities to participate in sports. We've worked with them specifically on swimming and track and field. We've got some other conversations started, but swimming and track and field really have made a lot of progress. So what we've done with them, or what they have done with the support from Adaptive Sports New England, is create structure for students who have vision impairment or mobility impairment. And I'll get back to intellectual impairment in a minute to talk about the Special Olympics programs. But the students who have vision impairment or mobility impairment to participate in the existing competition, track and field and swimming, within the high school programs. So for instance, in the track program, the athletes who race wheelchairs can race the 100-meter dash, the 800-meter run, or do the shot put. And so those are the three events that the MIA has designated in order to create some concentration, so there's some competition for people to race against. Right. Because if one person's training for the 100 and the other one's training for the mile, then you don't have any way of having a race. So we do the 100 and the 800 and the shot put. And so on the program of any track meet, whether it's a dual meet or whether it's a invitational on the weekends or whether it's the MIA championships at the end of the year, there's a slot they do the 100-meter dash for the boys, and then the 100-meter dash for the girls, and then the 100-meter dash in the wheelchair for the boys, and the 100-meter dash in the wheelchair for the girls. And if there aren't enough athletes at any given meet, say it's only a dual meet between two schools, and there may only be one athlete who is racing a wheelchair, then there are ways of combining that so that the athletes can race together and have other people to compete against. Similarly, with the athletes who are ambulatory, someone who's blind or who's ambulatory with a mobility impairment, someone with cerebral palsy or an amputation or similar type of disability, they would run right in among everybody else, but the MIA has created the format to recognize their accomplishments and pull out the winner within the Paralympic category to recognize that as an accomplishment. And there's some standards for that. And yeah, it really is a great model. In fact, MIA has been recognized by it. By the National Federation of High Schools. They were just last month were down in Providence, and MIA was presenting their model to the national conference because the National Federation feels it's something that's worth sharing.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, how far do you think the public awareness and acceptance has come? And what do you think needs to be done to inspire more involvement in adaptive sports?
You know, I love that phrase, inspire involvement. I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm so inspired. And my response is, well, what are you inspired to do? Because that's really what the question is. If it's inspiring and it makes you feel good, well, that doesn't do the kids who have disabilities doesn't help them very much. So if you feel inspired, what are you inspired to do? What are you inspired to be involved?
Right.
And the greatest need in this environment right now is awareness and encouragement of children who have disabilities, youth and young adults who have visual impairments or mobility impairments, encouraging them to give it a try, encouraging them to make the contact to learn more about it, so that there's an easy pathway for them to get involved, a safe pathway for them to get involved. Through our Paralympic Sport Club, where it's a Paralympic dedicated program set up specifically to support the athletes who have vision impairments or mobility impairments, right from the grassroots level, novice level, on up through some much stronger athletes. We bring in the equipment. We've got all the coaches there who are knowledgeable in that arena, and we try and support them right there. And that's a real safe environment to try. Now we want them to also try participating on their school team or in their local YMCA team or Boys and Girls Club team. But we continue the Paralympic Sport Club once a week, so that they can come back and get that little bit of specialized extra attention, a little bit of extra coaching, a little bit more dedicated one-on-one, and have a group to share ideas with. Because if I'm the only wheelchair racer on my high school team, I don't have any way of getting better because I don't have anybody to talk to, and I don't have. You can't expect the coach to know much about that. So we run these Paralympic Sport Club programs for track and field and swimming, to accommodate that. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming, and I hope you enjoyed the show.
And Susan, it's been really fun, so thank you very much. I love talking about this. So.
Okay. Athletes with visual, mobility, and physical impairments have a greater opportunity to participate in sports events that once were considered unsuitable or inappropriate. Let's accept these athletes for what they now can do, which is simply amazing. Join us again on You're Not Alone Surviving Your Child's Disability.